Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 144. Today's show is brought to you by Hunter Creation, graphic design and website designers putting your marketing ideas to life through bumper stickers, websites, business cards, you name it, they can help you out. Visit them at huntercreation.com. And Sierra Lupe Consulting.
Sierra Lupe Herbal Consulting offers in-home or distance consultations, custom formulations, and holistic care in conjunction with your existing diagnosis or medication. You can get a hold of me, Sue Sierra Lupe, at thepracticalherbalist.com.
All right, Candace Hunter with Get Healthy Now with Candace.
Are you working with a pre-diagnosis, like pre-diabetes or pre-something else? Are you concerned about your health over the long run? Would you like to maybe start to use some more natural treatments for dealing with some of the diagnoses or the chronic conditions that you've been dealing with? If you would, check out Get Healthy Now with Candace. She can consult both near and far, and she'd love to help you get healthy.
All right. And Ace High Heat Graphics, custom and printed shirts and hats. A great way for your group or nonprofit or church group, whatever you have, to raise funds for your activities. As low as $5.25 a shirt. Give them a call at acehighheatgraphics.com. Occupy Medical.
Occupy Medical is a free street reach herbal clinic. We have doctors and nurses and herbalists and mental health providers all working together for the better of the community, proving that healthcare really is a human right. Contact us at occupy-medical.org.
All right. And the Herbal Nerd Society.
Herbal Nerd Society is an exclusive membership which operates not only to educate the members about some of the pretty involved and advanced information about the herb of the month that we choose, but it is also a great way to support the Practical Herbalist website and the Real Herbalism Radio podcast.
So if you'd like to get cool videos or cool audio,
Let's Talk series,
or if you'd like to get a hold of all the podcasts that are available for Real Herbalism Radio, which is 140 some odd. It's a lot of them.
A lot.
Definitely a lot. So if you want to get a hold of those and you want some exclusive articles, you want to maybe dive a little deeper into your herbal practice or your herbal learning, check out the Herbal Nerd Society. Join us now.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, on with the show. Herbalists have 1,000 different ways to connect plants with the people who need them. Some are ultra-modern, like biochemistry and the science of herbal medicine making, and others are older, yet just as powerful when you know how to use them. Today we're talking with spagiricist and mycologist Jason Scott, owner and operator of Feral Fungi and curator at Alka Mycology, about using the Doctrine of Signatures to work with plants and mushrooms. Now here are your hosts, Candace Hunter and Sue Sierra Lupe.
I'm Candace Hunter.
And I'm Sue Sierra Lupe.
And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio. Welcome back, Jason.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you here in this wonderful city. You're not normally running around here.
Yeah, you're not normally Eugene.
Yeah, kind of. I've got family here, so I stop through and visit my nephews quite often.
Oh, what a good uncle you are.
Yeah.
I hope they're listening.
Yeah, pay attention, kids.
Pay attention, kids.
Listen to Uncle Jason.
Got a famous uncle.
That's right. Yeah, and you wanted to come back and talk about the Doctrine of Signatures. I've talked to a lot of herbalists who work with plants about the Doctrine of Signatures, but a mycologist, you got to help us out here. What is going on with that one?
Totally. Well, I mean, when I came before, I was talking a lot about my alchemical explorations into mycology, into the mushrooms, and I think such a key part of that, is the Doctrine of Signatures and Doctrine of Correspondences, because based on the planetary archetype that you're working with, corresponds to a different day of the week, and it's going to kind of denote when you're going to work with what mushroom at what time to kind of potentize the medicine even more. So, and just to give a little bit of a background, I think from the herbal, at least when I started learning about herbalism and heard the Doctrine of Signatures for the first time,
which is
Put you on the spot. Which
is some time ago. No, but which is the Doctrine of Signatures being
right. So I was just going to explain that when I first learned about it, it was more like this herb looks like this thing, so it's good for that thing. For example, like a walnut looks like your brain, so it's good for your brain. Or a carrot looks like your eye, so it's good for your eye. And I thought,
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting, but it never really like resonated super deeply with me. And so I kind of wanted to see the deeper levels of it, and getting into the alchemical practice and philosophy, kind of came upon Nicholas Culpeper's work.
Yes.
So he wrote the Compleat Herbal.
Way back.
The 1500s, I think.
Yeah, even before I was born, and I'm old.
Yeah, this is one of those.
It was a while ago. It was a while ago. But it was really interesting to me to kind of see that, because even starting the alchemical work, you're kind of just given a list of correspondences. So you're kind of given like a list of planets and then the herbs that correspond with them. And so Nicholas Culpeper talked about that a lot. He would say, for example, here's St. John's wort, and it's ruled by the sun, but no description of why is ruled by the sun or anything to that extent. So again, I'm kind of taking the doctrine of signatures a step further than this looks like this, and working more with archetypes. And you can do that on multiple different levels, but I think today, should kind of stick with the planets, because that's what I work with and what I use in the practical side of things in the laboratory, applying to the mushrooms as I'm preparing the medicines.
Now, with the doctrine of signatures, I know some people use it as a pneumatic device in order to help them remember what herbs are good for. And naturally, the more that we learn about how to heal with herbs, the more we understand that it looks like the lymphatic system. Nope, it doesn't. That's
Right.
there's lymphs all over the body. So to use it as a pneumatic, sure, that's a good primer, but you're talking about
Right.
something a little more deep.
Yeah, and I mean, there's kind of like a similarity that I hear in that too, but it's working with drawing correspondences between the archetypes. And so when you understand something through its relationship to something else, you kind of understand it on a deeper level. And for example, I'm going to be talking about kind of the relationships with the mushrooms, specifically the mushrooms, but it works with plants as well, and the mushrooms and the planetary archetypes. And so there's this great quote from Paracelsus that I just want to read to you that I feel like really encapsulates that. And Paracelsus says, "If I have mana in my constitution, I can attract mana from heaven. Melissa, or lemon balm, is not only in my garden, but also in the air and in the heavens. Saturn is not only in the sky, but also deep in the earth and the ocean. What is Venus but Artemisia, mugwort, that grows in your garden? What is iron but Mars? That is to say, Venus and Artemisia are both products of the same essence, and Mars and iron are both manifestations of the same root cause. What is the human body but a constellation of the same powers that are contained in the stars in the sky? He who knows iron knows the attributes of Mars. He who knows Mars knows the qualities of iron. What would become of your heart if there were no sun in the universe? What would become of your vasa spermatica, or creative energies, if there were no Venus? To grasp the invisible or etheric elements, to attract them by their material correspondences, to control, purify, and transform by the living power of the spirit or the Vulcan, this is true alchemy." And again, that's Paracelsus. And I think he just does a really beautiful way of kind of like encapsulating why these planetary archetypes and energies are important. And because you're understanding things on a deeper level, and kind of from the alchemical tradition, the main hermetic axiom coming from Hermes Trismegistus or Thoth is as above, so below. And so that's something that, whether you're an alchemist or not, you've probably heard at some point or another. And so we work with that in the lab, and we always look at our still or our setup as kind of like a microcosm of the macrocosm. Right? And so when you're distilling something, it's giving up the ghost, and you're releasing it up into the universe or into the heavens, and then condensing it back down into its material form again. So while we're doing that, we can kind of collect and capture those celestial energies in the formulas that we're putting together, or in the preparations that we're making.
Through your process, or are you talking about it mirrors something happening on a more what?
Yeah, so well, I mean, just you're able to say, for example, let's go with something that Paracelsus was just talking about there with Artemisia being ruled by Venus. And so Venus is associated with Friday, And so the day of the week, Friday, comes from the Old Norse goddess Frida, who has an association with Venus as well. And if you're on the most basic level, if you want to like process your mugwort on Friday, you're going to capture those celestial energies that have that Venusian energy. It's going to strengthen your preparation as it comes out on the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's another type of practice that does that sort of thing with planting on certain times of the moon. I can't remember what it's called.
I don't remember.
Biodynamics.
Biodynamics,
Yeah,
thank
exactly.
you. Yes.
And that came from, by and large, from Rudolf Steiner,
Yes.
who was, I believe, a Rosicrucian. And so the Rosicrucian traditions are very tied in with the alchemical traditions. Those kind of schools like the Masons and the Rosicrucians, those secret societies basically kind of carried those traditions into the modern age, those kind of like mystery traditions like alchemy and astrology. And so his work with the biodynamics is heavily influenced from alchemy. And you see that he's following the patterns of nature. And that's all alchemy really is in general, is like you're looking at, you're observing, and then you're following the patterns of nature. It's like, how do we learn to distill something? We learn to distill because you see that water evaporates, goes up into the sky, condenses, and then comes back down into material form again. So it's just like we're replicating these natural patterns that we can see right in front of us. And then you can see how that tracks with the season too, and the stars as they move across the sky.
Well, two of my kids went to the Waldorf school. It was a publicly funded, like a charter school version of it. So I've heard it used numerous times before, and I'm just like, over my head. That's interesting. And then I'm done thinking about it because there are 30 kids in front of me. So
right.
Keeping them going was more important than ruminating about that.
Right.
But I know that going to a biodynamic farm is a little bit different than going to an organic farm that's not biodynamic, and noticing that not just in the way they were planting, but in the way that they're harvesting. And I found it more of an organism.
Right. Right. And you're just kind of like working within the natural order of things, you're just kind of following those natural patterns. And in a way, if you wanted to, you could think of this process of medicine making akin to that of being like a biodynamic medicine making process. Although this predated biodynamic farming by quite a long while, there's still that.
In truth, honestly, biodynamic farming is picking up what we already knew ages and ages ago, and it just was sort of tossed aside or lost, or we tried something else for a bit. But a lot of what they're doing in biodynamic farms is following the patterns of nature, which is what farmers did way back when. Right. Because that's what they did. Right. It was just normal farming then. Now it's not normal, but that doesn't mean that it isn't. I mean, that's where it's really rooted.
Right. Well, you're adding another construct to it as well. I don't think that the farmers from way back were applying their farming energy to, is it Friday? Did they looking at a 7-day week as that's the 7-day week is not all that. That's not ancient. The 12-month year, that's fairly that's relatively new. We have a 13-month year. Right. We
following
even have a change. Correct. Right. So it does range varies according to your perspective, but perspective is what it's all about.
Right. And I don't know the intricacies of biodynamic farming, but I do know that as opposed to following the days of the week, they follow the planets as they're moving through the sky. And so to my mind and to my practice, you can potentize your medicine even more if you're looking at like current planetary transits, what's going on. If you've got like Venus crossing right over you, then you capture that Venusian energy at that time is going to be a lot more potent than if you're just working on Friday. But kind of working with the alchemical framework that we're given, each of the inner 7 planets, which kind of rule the seen universe, right? You get to Saturn.
Scene, SEEN,
S-E-E-N,
not the C,
yeah.
not
Well,
the one with the
I
C
mean,
in
it
it.
depends. They're pretty hip
SEEN.
planets too.
They
so.
are. They're part of the scene too.
but yeah, so I mean, once you get to Saturn, it's kind of considered energetically and physically is like the boundary between the seen and the unseen universe, because that's kind of the last planet that you could see with your naked eye. So the outer three planets is like you can't really, or they're all still debating about Pluto, I'm pretty sure, but
yeah, it depends on the day.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe even the hour, but
yeah.
But anyway, so you work with those inner 7 planets, and they're or more realistically 5 planets and 2 luminaries. The 2 luminaries being the sun and the moon, and those correspond with the 7 days of the week as we operate currently. So on the most basic level, you can work with the planetary energies on the day of the week that you're working with.
Yeah, so it's more of a celestial mindfulness.
Yeah.
These things are symbols of stuff that should be invoking other mindfulness tasks. Remember to kindness, remember activity, remember this. So trying to make you a better person. And then incorporate that into the medicine that you're making, I assume. Right.
And also kind of like capturing the general celestial energy of that thing. So to make it a little bit more tangible, we can talk about, I'm going to talk about mushrooms because that's kind of
that's
where,
your duty.
Yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
That's where we are.
So it's been really fun because you like look at the archetypes and the energies of the different planets, and then you draw correspondences between things that are energetically similar. And when I'm doing this, I'm looking at the morphology of the thing, how it's growing, what it looks like, what the color it is. I'm looking at the actions that it has, the therapeutic actions, kind of like how it's working on your system, what physical system it's connected to. I'm looking at the energetics, so like if it's cold and dry, or hot and moist, or what kind of herbal energetics that it's carrying with it. And so one of my favorite mushrooms is lion's mane, and that's a pretty like hot topic in the mushroom world, especially because Paul Stamets talks that one up all the time. But I think for a really good reason, just because they found that the hericenones in there are one of the best neuroregenerative compounds out of anything in nature. And so it has this really amazing neuroregenerative property that is really amazing. And so I think about lion's mane, and I think about its qualities, and I think about its associations, and I think lion's mane is associated with the brain. It's associated with the nervous system. It's also associated with the stomach. It helps with digestion, and I think that's probably also connected to like our nerve endings in the stomach. And then I think about like what it looks like. It's just kind of like voluptuous and white. A lot of times, when
you find it. It's big.
Big and beautiful and white, and so to my mind, there's no other correspondence that could fit the lion's mane better than the moon. Right? So the moon physiologically corresponds to the brain and to the nervous system and to the stomach. Like those are its primary physiological correspondences. But then you also look at the energetic levels of the moon, and it's dealing with the tides and the water. It's dealing with the emotions, which I find lion's mane to be really calming, good for things like depression and anxiety, which I feel kind of like associate with that lunar energy. And then that white color, that voluptuous kind of like white color that it has too, are all very lunar kind of qualities. So again, I'm like looking at this mushroom, and then I'm seeing this deeper resonance of the moon and what that moon represents and what the moon is. And then there's all these traditional materia medica and texts and everything too that draw correspondences between physiological systems and the different planets that rule them. And then you can take that even deeper and go into the zodiac as well. But again, I just want to kind of stick with the planets for
planets are a good place to start.
Simplicity's sake, yeah.
Wow. So what are some of the other ones that you think about? Because some of this is kind of new notions. You're putting together stuff that people in the West haven't associated.
Right. With. Yeah. And I really appreciate, my good friend Sajid Popham has been a really big influence on this, because he's a teacher over at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and runs Organic Unity, which is a spagyric preparation lab that I worked for a while. But he was really big on kind of like looking at Culpeper's work and looking at different people who are just kind of saying, oh, well, this herb is associated with this planet. This herb is associated with this planet, and not really.
They didn't really understand it.
They didn't really describe, or maybe they understood it, but they didn't really describe like how they were coming to the conclusions that they were coming to. And the alchemy being a practice of observation, like we were talking about with the biodynamics, is like we want to understand how to like make these correspondences for ourselves, because what they have in their Materia Medica, they had a lot of European herbs, but they didn't have a lot of New World herbs, or a lot of things from the East, or a lot of things from South America, or anything from those areas. Yeah. And there's just like a logistical thing of where they were in that time. So his Sage's work and kind of like helping to understand the planetary archetypes and those energies and where they're coming from really kind of laid this foundation to like look at them and to understand them, and then to look at the nature and the quality. And I think that's where it kind of takes it deeper too than the kind of typical understanding of the doctrine of signatures and correspondences, and takes it deeper than, oh, this looks like a brain, so it's good for a brain,
right?
Or this looks like the eye, so it's good for the eye. It's
just
like
a cartoon version of what the doctrine of signatures
and
really
instead you're like looking at the whole thing, you're looking at the whole picture, and then you're looking at this energetic archetype of the planet and connecting the two. And again, like I was saying, it connects to the morphology, it connects to the color, it connects to the actions, the therapeutic actions, which are largely related to what the compounds are that are present in those things. And so again, much more of like a whole snapshot of what that thing actually is. And then again, kind of taking things back to like a philosophical level too, is thought in the alchemical tradition, the hermetic pillars of hermeticism are alchemy, astrology, and the Kabbalah. And so there's the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, or the Kabbalah, and each one is ruled by a different planet. And it's thought that when we're on kind of like the base level, we're on like the physical level, which they call Malkuth. But it's thought that when something dies, when something gives up the ghost or returns to the heavenly place that it came from, it kind of returns to the Sephiroth, which it came from. And so it returns to the Sephiroth. So Sephiroth would be like a node on the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah, or the Kabbalistic understanding.
It's like a branch.
Branches. I know what branches are, and I know what nodes are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, just kind of like making it a little esoteric, but I just kind of also want to give to like where this tradition of like where it comes from, because it's like rooted in very deep,
so
sometimes
some
heady,
extent,
esoteric.
When you're starting to look at that on a more like starting to bring that concept into practical, you would say lion's mane comes from the same place where the moon comes from.
Exactly.
They both come from the same part of heaven or the spirit realm.
Exactly. Or they share that essence, like Paracelsus was talking about.
that they are both manifestations of that specific piece of the realm.
Right.
Unlike, for instance, St. John's wort and the sun, which come from a different spot.
Right.
They are different energy and they come from a different place.
Exactly.
So when you start looking at, that's almost like it's a different culture. Like the moon comes from this continent and the sun comes from that continent, if the spirit world was a giant Earth.
Yeah, if you want to map it, no, that's
think of it that way.
That's a good way to put it, for sure. Yeah. And you think of like things coming from that Sephiroth, or that that area of the Tree of Life, are going to have that kind of resonant energy.
Yes.
And so when they just, again, kind of going, I always try to bring it back to like the traditions of the philosophies of where this is coming from, because.
Now, a word from Thomas Easley about the Journal of Functional Herbalism.
The Journal of Functional Herbalism is a free online journal promoting the integration of traditional Western herbalism, clinical nutrition, and functional medicine. It's published by the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine, and you can find the Journal of Functional Herbalism at functionalherbalism.com.
Again, it was all based in direct observation, so they had a reason why they were making these observations. And largely today is like we don't really know very much about, like hardly anybody knows much about alchemy or astrology or Kabbalah, and what we do know about it is like very shallow and kind of like lost on what the traditional people were using it for and practicing it with. So
Well, and the traditional peoples, I mean, even just the average folk knew a lot more about those things than we do.
yeah,
In fact, often, like the average Joe farmer knew more about the astrological aspects of what he was doing than someone today who is a modern herbalist.
Right.
You know, not that herbalists aren't smart or anything. It's just
right. We're
information
kind
that
of
hasn't.
disconnected from it.
Yeah, we've been disconnected, and oftentimes I've noticed in patterns of growth, there's a point where you're completely invested in it, whatever
Right.
it is. Like a child is completely invested in the family's culture, and then hits the teen years and is completely anti the family's culture,
Right.
and is exactly the opposite and rebels. And I feel like we as herbalists and as culture in general, world in general, are coming out of a teen phase where we're starting to say, well, you know, in your 20s, usually most people start looking back at some of the things mom and dad said or did or family culture and say, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
I should pick up that practice again or whatever. And you start like returning, and you have new things, but you return to some of the thick pieces of home. And I feel like that's
Right.
what we're doing.
Yeah, totally. That's a really interesting way to think about it. And I feel like it's kind of like a good time to put this in here too. You know, it's like of just how far removed from those traditions and understandings we are, you know. And I just think about the term alchemy in this day and age and how people use that. And people were saying, oh, this is chocolate alchemy, and this is, you know, it's like this term is like applied very loosely.
It's
into
like the word
anything.
Zen.
Yeah,
Everything
totally.
is Zen.
Exactly.
It's not, but everything is
Exactly.
described as Zen or alchemy.
Right. And so you can look back and you say, well, what is alchemy? And like, here's this like rooted tradition that you can point to and say, here was this practice that happened, and here's where it came from, and here's why they did things the way that they did them, and here's a physical practice that is still viable from that too.
Yeah.
And so to call it something else, or to kind of appropriate, for lack of a better term, that term, and say, oh, well, what I'm doing is alchemy. It's like you're baking a cake. It's not really alchemy,
Right. Yeah.
you know. And so not to diminish what people are doing or anything.
Oh yeah,
but I
some
think
amazing
there's
cakes out there.
Yeah,
Oh
exactly.
my God.
Really good cakes, but are they really alchemical? You know, I don't
No,
think so. You
not
know,
so much,
and
yeah.
and the same with astrology. You know, a lot of astrology has been kind of co-opted by the New Age movement that started in the late 1800s. You know, and the Theosophists, and lost its traditional rooting. Which again, now we think of astrology as we're just thinking about very shallow. I mean, not necessarily shallow,
Honestly,
not necessarily shallow,
A lot
but
of
yeah,
times,
like pop,
it's like, who
pop
am I going to be
astrology.
dating next?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Sun
Lottery
sign
numbers.
astrology. We're
Yeah.
thinking just in like psychological terms,
Yeah.
but again, it was like
Not for
traditionally
human betterment. It's just what lottery number should you be?
right.
Right.
And traditionally, it was rooted in patterns of nature, right?
Yeah.
So it was
Mhm.
rooted in following those patterns. So I think like what
Yeah.
you're saying was really beautiful, because I think we are kind of coming to this place where we're like looking back
Yeah.
in time and looking at these traditions that we kind of saw something good in already. Is like we kind of have been, it's like, oh, well, there must be something good to astrology, so like let's apply that, but we kind of doing it on this very shallow level, and it feels like maybe now we're kind of, oh, well, there's a reason that people back then were doing it the way that they were doing it, and let's maybe like take a look at that before we just kind of go blindly into applying all of our own
Yeah.
ideas
Well, and
to it.
what I'm noticing is that there are people like yourself. I mean, you know a lot about science. You're well invested in that, which is to some extent, I think of it as being a very modern alchemical style process
Yeah,
that's missing a component.
yeah,
And you were called by the mushrooms to work with them and start working with doctrine and signatures and all that, which is really bringing science and the spiritual aspect back together in a modern version of alchemy.
right.
I
Which
don't
is
think
really
of
like-
science as being modern at all. It's been going on forever. I mean, it's basically curiosity with evidence, and that's, you know, Galileo, not exactly a new dude in our atmosphere. It's just we have a culture now that it's more, people belittle science, people belittle whatever learning, maybe because they feel overwhelmed or what have you, but people feel distant from these things. And I think with your version of alchemy, bridging that distance by showing that there's more to whatever. There's more to science. There's more to literature.
Right.
There's more to all kinds of
Right.
things than just what's on the surface.
Right. And I think
Taking science away from clickbait.
totally.
Okay.
And what I was kind of hearing you say, Candace, in that too, is that we're in this modern era of a really materialist science.
Capitalism plus
which
science is
modern-
not awesome.
Yeah, which modern, I mean, it goes back to like the 1700s when the Royal Society was really divorcing themselves from the practices of alchemy. And so again, looking back into history and looking at the roots of everything, all of our modern sciences came from alchemy.
Yeah.
Like the word chemistry came directly from alchemy.
Yeah.
When the Royal Society was trying to separate themselves, and then all the other biology, physics, everything kind of evolved out of that, but they kind of stripped the spirit from it. And that's kind of like what I was hearing you say was that we have this practice of science that's not the way I kind of see it. Is like we have a practice of science that isn't rooted in anything.
Yeah. It's like the sulfur.
And it's kind of like it's kind of just like blindly charging into the future, just like seeing what we can discover.
Right.
And it's from that it's become very materialistic, and without that spirit or that philosophy, like it doesn't really have a guide. It doesn't have anything that kind of is like, well, why are you looking at it like that, or why are you taking it that way? And kind of where, I think of the Hermetic traditions, like they were very scientific, and that's where a lot of the initial scientific underpinnings came from, of direct observation. But there was also this relationship too with philosophy, and it was always a relationship where it was, you don't get one without the other, right? So you have this philosophy and this cosmology of the universe and how the universe is and how the universe works, and you're operating off of that in your discovery of science. And then they had to kind of like back each other up too. So if you did something in the lab off direct observation, it kind of had to like fit with the philosophy, or you had to change the philosophy, and vice versa. If you
Change
had this
is not
philosophy.
easy.
Yeah.
People don't like changing. I don't like it.
Exactly.
It means maturity, and
Exactly.
I am not all about that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think, and I got into a lot of this stuff too because of a lot of the problems that I just have seen with the modern world, and a lot of the things that we're facing as a culture and as a community, and all the things that we're doing to this planet and to the natural kind of way of life here, and saw the way that these like traditional teachings and the way that it was balanced, theory and philosophy and practice all together, kind of laid this foundation to do things in more of an ethical manner, to say the least. Is because you're operating within a system, whereas now I feel like we think we're operating outside of the system, and we're kind of like driving the boat,
Right, yeah.
and in that we are kind of disregarding all these laws of nature and laws of life, and before everything was rooted in that.
Right.
And
So you're talking about cultural arrogance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And kind of like where we got lost along the way, like how did we get where we are today,
Well, and I mean, we need often we live in a dualistic world. I mean, there's self and not self. There's, so we probably as a species needed to step out of that space where it was all rooted in the spiritual understanding and philosophy in the greater world, so that we could better understand the reductionist part. But there's a point at which you have to then turn around and go back.
Right.
So it's like the yin and yang symbol. There's a little bit of the light color and the dark, and a little bit of the dark and the light. So we have to go back and forth. And so now is the time where we're starting to return back to, okay, we've got an awesome, incredible mechanistic science process. We've got tools, we've got language, we've got math, we've got an incredible new construct. Now we need to reroot it in some of the more spiritual, root it back into the whole world system.
Totally.
And we have to revamp the whole world system understanding to accept that new thing that we've now created, and we needed to step out to create it.
Right. And yeah, and I mean, I think, they're not inherently disconnected. I think they're inherently really connected, but then we saw this kind of like split in history that went kind of both ways, where we came from this hermetic tradition that really had both the material and the spiritual sides happening simultaneously, which was then kind of pushed out with all the other pagan heretic societies by the Roman Church, and kind of like disregarded and delegitimized and forced to hide, essentially, and all the text and all the knowledge that they gained burned, and then it was just ultra spiritual, and then flipped to the other side of just being ultra scientific and ultra physical. And so it's like almost like a pendulum swinging, right? Where it's kind of like this balance, like there's this balance in the middle, and then we went way over here to the spiritual, and then like way over here to the scientific, and right now we're kind of in the middle where there's still a big split. Right, and you can kind of see that. But we're narrowing it. But we're narrowing it for sure. Yeah, and I think kind of coming back to that middle is like the ultimate goal in that. Yeah, and that's the way that it kind of weaves back into the medicine, into the practices too, and bringing the doctrine of signatures in to understand the plants and the mushrooms and the metals on another level, on like a more spiritual level, as well as the physiological level that you're working with them on. So I like to really kind of balance that and try and understand, like you were talking about, understand the constituents of what's in the things that we're working with. So that's kind of a lot of what I want to do. I'm pretty small at this point, but I'm trying to figure out how to get access to gas chromatography and liquid chromatography.
That's an expensive
figure...
hobby, Frank.
Exactly. But there's so much teaching, especially in the mushrooms, where we don't know as much about that, and so like how do we figure out more about the extracts, and then like what we're extracting and what's coming out, and then what those things are used for. And I'm all about the holistic, but I'm also really interested in like what's coming out in those extracts and the different parts of the extracts, and like how those compare to other styles of extracts. And so there's like that scientific side, and then the planetary.
Let's talk about how you fuse the scientific side and the spiritual side in the spagyric that you brought with you.
Right. You can use you can use a mushroom as an example as you walk us through that.
Yeah, totally. So I talked a little bit about the lion's mane here, but maybe let's choose a different one. Let's talk about like turkey tail. Okay. Right? And so
that's my favorite.
That's a good one.
And again, we were kind of talking about Venus before, and I think that the turkey tail has a very Venusian type of energy to it. So the turkey tail is very like voluptuous and kind of like curvy, and then have like those beautiful colored strands on them a lot of times. They kind of like flow into each other.
No two are alike.
Yeah. And then it has physiological actions on the genitourinary tract and the kidneys, which Venus is associated with both of those things. And Venus being that planet of kind of like love and beauty, that feminine energy, that feminine planet, associated with the genitourinary tract and the kidneys, and then also with the breasts and like breast cancer. Turkey tail has been really positive in breast cancer. So think about all of those associations.
Positive in helping treat,
treat breast
cancer. For those listening that do not understand that.
There's been a decent amount of research on that, hasn't there?
The PSK from one of the polysaccharides from the turkey tail has actually been isolated and used in Japan, and they give it to all of the people who are on chemotherapy in Japan. In conjunction with the chemotherapy, the government pays for them to take this polysaccharide isolate from the turkey tail mushroom.
It's a tremendous success, and particularly I've noticed when patients, they'll have breast cancer, have a radical mastectomy, and then unfortunately breast cancer will show up in another part of their body, like their spine or something like that, and being able to treat it in that way, which at that point it's who knows once it's gone to another part of the body. I know that's weird for some of the listeners to think that breast cancer would move to another part of the body, but remember that's just our common term for that type of cancer.
As you say, the breast cancer means a specific type of molecular or chemical action that's most often found in the breast.
So
that's where it usually shows up.
Cancer isn't just a type of thing. It's there are many different types of cancer, and they may more commonly show up in one part of the body, but that doesn't mean that they're isolated to that part of the body.
Like the word cancer is kind of like the word germ. There's all
Germ,
kinds
right.
of different germs and
Yes.
all kinds of different
Yes,
cancers.
there's girl germs and there's boy germs.
And the cooties.
And the
There's also
cooties. Yes, that's right. Now let's not get too sciencey here.
Yeah.
So would
No, I
turkey
think-
tail work for
I think-
cooties?
Yeah, well,
That's the real question.
that's not been scientifically tested yet, so they're not really
yet.
sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but so again, just kind of like drawing those associations and like looking at the physiological systems that the turkey tail has been scientifically proven through clinical studies to be active on, and how we understand its therapeutic actions, and then corresponding that with the planet of Venus, and then it's going to give us kind of like insight into more of its energetic qualities as well, because we understand Venus is that planet of like self-love, being that feminine kind of like the nurturer, like beauty, and then also coincidentally the turkey tail has, or I mean, I don't really know if I believe in coincidence, but
Right.
the turkey tail also is really good for cosmetic skin conditions too, and so thinking of Venus having that
Like
association,
melanomas or
yeah, and in like eczema and burns and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you start looking at like the correspondences that way, you could start making some guesses, some really well educated guesses on how you might use a particular mushroom
Right.
that hasn't necessarily got like other documentation that it's been used this way, but
Right.
because it's Venusian, for instance,
Right.
why not try it for a skin related condition? Because
Exactly.
logically it could. So give it a try and see if it does.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the mushrooms are just like such a new thing into the field at this point, not very much research being done on them. So I think understanding like a lot of what's out there on the mushrooms is very broad. Like mushrooms are good for everything, and this mushroom is good for everything.
Right.
And so it's
Right.
for me, it's kind of like trying to dial that in a little bit, and like how do we specifically target and use this mushroom with like what is it really really good for? Like what are the things that it can just drive right into and is gonna be good for more than this mushroom is good for that, And so kind of looking at how it specifically addresses different things in the body, and then since it's associated with Venus, then I'm going to process this mushroom on Friday.
Yeah.
Because Friday is ruled by Venus, and I might try to do it, I'd try to do it in like the Venusian hour, so it's going to be like sunrise for 3 hours.
Oh, I'm so not down with Venus myself.
so that's just kind of the way that I'm like applying it and working with it, and like I was saying earlier too, you can get really deep by looking where Venus is transiting and maybe capture Venus as it's transiting to your extract.
transiting
transiting on your chart or transiting, there's lots of different ways. I mean
that's the astrology
that dynamic,
part.
Yeah, that dynamic's a little bit more complex and harder to understand. So trying to keep it
I did read a book once called Astrology for the Lighter Side of the Brain that made that closer to understandable, though it didn't teach me how to map it out and do all the math and figure it out for myself. But when people talked about it, and it's been a decade since I read that, but it was really helpful in understanding what that means.
It gets pretty complicated. That's why I try to just kind of, when I talk about it and when I teach about it, I try to just kind of relay it on the most basic level and just work with the days of the week, because that's what's right in front of you, and that's simple.
Do you have any of this information on your website or?
So currently I have on my website, alchemicology.com, when you sign up for my email list, I have my list of planetary correspondences to different mushrooms. And that's also available in the Radical Mycology book. That was kind of the flagship where I did that list initially. And then it's also published in Robert Rogers' newest book, Fungal Essences.
Robert Rogers has
I have that.
Yeah,
I got that.
So there's that chart's in the back of there too, and
wait, what's the name of that book again?
Funny.
Fungal Essences.
That's on my
Fungal Essences,
and that's his 30 plus years of working clinically with.
I have his other book.
Instead of flower essences, working with fungal essences, and he prepares them all a little bit differently.
I bet
Yeah,
he does.
I'm pretty sure that's the one. I'm almost
So-
positive, yeah. Because I
so-
remember thinking it was like a flower essence book for mushrooms. I was
Yeah.
like, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
It's on my giant stack of books
Yeah.
I haven't yet gotten to.
totally.
For shame.
God.
Books you haven't read?
The problem is it's like a 3-foot stack right now. So,
Yeah.
keep
They're going to be
adding.
building a new room out of her stack of books.
Library.
I'm thinking the child, I mean, do we really
Do you really need children?
we could move him into an RV in the backyard.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
RV tent is fine.
A tent.
Yeah,
He can sleep in a tent. It'll
It's
make him
character
want.
building.
He'll want to go to college then.
Yeah. So so people can contact you at, tell me the places
So
again.
again, if you go to my website, alchemicology.com, and you
Mhm.
sign up for my email list, then you can get a free
That's how you
PDF of the mushroom chart.
Ooh, a free PDF.
Yeah.
You hear that, listeners?
And then feralfungi.com is where I have my spagyric tinctures. You can find my email address on that website too. It's just feralfungi@gmail.com.
Okay.
People feel free to contact me about teaching classes. I've been teaching mostly here in the Northwest where I live, but also all over the country. So I'm open and available for that. And yeah.
Awesome.
Well,
yeah.
thank you
Thank
for
you so
being
much.
with us.
Yeah, thank you guys
Appreciate
again
it.
for having me again. And
Yeah, and don't forget, folks, we say put an herb on it, but we also mean put a mushroom on that thing too.
Yeah.
don't forget the mushrooms.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.